the last people joining as we speak, the possibility to join. We have 73 people on board so far. We had over double the amount of registrations, so I was hoping, of course, whether everybody would be able to join, but I would be lying if I would say I was not very fond to see so many people joining for this webinar organized by the Netherlands Institute for Sustainable Packaging, KIDV, as the abbreviation in Dutch is, which is organized on behalf of and in cooperation with MyPack, a European project that I will explain in a minute. So this webinar is recorded, so you can watch it later on our YouTube channel, just to tell you that up front. And let me briefly show you the agenda for today's session. So after my introduction, we have 3 presentations for you, each lasting roughly 15 minutes, after which there will be 5 minutes for questions and answers. Questions from the audience, you that is, will be done via the chat, and I will then read them out to our speakers. At the very end of after those 3 presentations, at the end, there will be a panel discussion with the speakers, plus my temporary colleague, I could say, our intern Tao Hesselenfeld, who will introduce herself by that time, who is researching exactly the topic that we're talking about today, being consumer behavior in relation to sustainable packaging. Right, so before we start, and this webinar being organized on behalf of MyPack, I very briefly want to take a minute of your time to show what that is and how KIDV was linked to this initiative. KIDV, as I briefly explained, is the Netherlands Institute for Sustainable Packaging. We are founded in 2013 here in The Hague, where the sun actually is shining now. This is very nice. And we are roughly 15 experts. We are funded by the Afvalfonds Verpakken in proper Dutch, which is the Dutch Packaging Waste Fund. So we basically help companies to fulfill their EPR obligations, the Extended Producer's Responsibility on packaging waste. So we do that by sharing knowledge. We offer advice on one-on-one sessions, but also larger gatherings. We develop tools, talk to players all along the supply chain, and we have a number of communities where specific topics are discussed, such as not coincidental that I mentioned this, the community of practice on reusable packaging that yours truly is spearheading. So that's KIDV. Now, what is MyPack? So MyPack is a Horizon 2020 program, which is a program by the European Commission to promote, well, let's say, environmental developments or circular initiatives. In this case, we started in 2017 with 20 plus other companies from France, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Greece, Switzerland, all over. And our aim is to support the market introduction of innovative packaging, and innovative packaging, specifically those that reduce food and packaging waste and the negative impact on the environment. We do this by talking to, again, all players in the chain, being packaging manufacturers, we have innovators, we have researchers, we have brand owners, experts on recycling, consumer behavior, sustainability, and so forth. If you are curious to find out the results of this program, the link is there. And one of the things that we actually did for the MyPack program more towards the end, after having developed a number of innovative solutions to make packaging more sustainable and see how we can introduce that onto the market. As you can read here, we actually scoped out 2 specific technologies that we focused on, being bio-based plastic packaging, whether that means it's renewable resources and or not biodegradable, and high barrier or active packaging. So we developed a number of techniques. I will not explain those here, but one of the things we did for this program and why KIDV was involved is testing of those new materials and specifically acceptance of consumers. The Wageningen University developed a very interesting approach for this, for which they actually needed to have samples to give to consumers and test their behavior and their responses. So what we basically did, we developed new packages, so mock-ups, you could say. We spent countless hours of making these kind of samples of non-existing packaging, but that looked like something that you could find in the supermarket, so that consumers would have more or less the idea that, hey, I'm actually holding an actual packaging, and what do I feel? What does it do to me if this packaging makes, like this one, a lot of noise, or what happens if the material feels sticky, or so is it a trigger to think, hey, perhaps this is a more sustainable material? So I will not tell you all these details. Obviously, our second presentation will dive into this from Wageningen University, Julia Granato. But before we move there, I will introduce our first speaker for today, who will first take us into the field of consumer behavior and psychology around consumer behavior. So I would like to ask Ellen van der Werf to open her camera and microphone. Ellen is Associate Professor at Groningen University at the Department of Environmental Psychology. Hopefully I said it correctly. I did. And I'll
yes, you did.
Okay, well, I can hear your microphone, so it seems to be working, and the presentation is loaded, so I will shut myself up now for 15 minutes, and I will leave the floor to you, Ellen.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Marcel. And I'm also checking. No, I'm not sure if you can see full screen, but doesn't matter. So thank you very much. My name is Ellen van der Werf. I work at the Environmental Psychology Group at the University of Groningen. And today I'll talk a bit about our research on sustainable behavior. So first of all, why is it actually important to focus on behavior? Why do we need a behavioral change? Well, first of all, what we often see is that technological solutions, and in this case, technological solutions is very broad, also sustainable packaging, of course, is included, is often overpowered by increasing consumption. So for example, in the last years, we have become much more efficient in recycling products, for example, but at the same time, we're using a lot of more products. So our waste has still, or can still be increasing. So consumption and technology that may be overpowered. And if we develop new technology, people also need to be able to understand the technology and use it in the correct way. So for example, if there is a new packaging material, people need to be able to also dispose of it correctly. New technology and policy need to be acceptable to people. So for example, if there is a new collection system in a neighborhood, people should find it acceptable. For example, if there's a new pay-as-you-throw system introduced where people pay for the amount of waste they produce, there may be resistance, and then it may not be able to implement that policy. So acceptability of consumers, of inhabitants, is key as well. And finally, technological solutions may also imply behavioral changes. So if there are new materials, that may imply that people need to use it in a different way. So as the IPCC report also said, we need behavioral change and not climate change. And today I would like to discuss 3 ways in which we can try to promote behavioral change. First of all, knowledge, then I'll go into motivation, and finally I'll focus on contextual factors. So knowledge is, of course, a very common strategy to try to change behaviors, providing people with knowledge. And there are different types of knowledge. People can have knowledge on the problem. So for example, that waste or the incineration of waste contributes to climate change or to landfills, for example, so to environmental problems. Then there is action-related knowledge. So which behavior do I have to change in order to reduce these problems? Which type of packaging, for example, should I consume? And effectiveness knowledge. So what is the impact of my behavior on the environment? How much do I contribute to solving the problem? And well, people may have misperceptions here. For example, people may think that that glass as a type of packaging is much more sustainable than plastic, which is often not the case. So then it could be important to change this knowledge, to try to provide people the correct knowledge. However, we also know from the literature that providing people with information is rarely sufficient to change behavior. So it's important, but unfortunately, it's not enough to change our behavior. So simply, for example, putting a logo on a packaging indicating how people should recycle it is not enough to change our behavior. So we also need motivations. And they can be roughly divided into 2 types of motivations. So on the one hand, motivations can focus on favorable outcomes for yourself. So you can think about money or status, but also pleasure or comfort, right? These are motives, reasons why we engage in a certain behavior, because it's pleasurable, because it brings us money, because it's comfortable. But there are also favorable outcomes for the collective. So we also do things, or we're also motivated by doing something for the collective. So you can think about moral considerations or doing good. So for example, helping someone is also a reason for us to engage in a behavior. And these two types of motivations, they are reflected in the values that people endorse. So when it concerns sustainable behavior, there are roughly 4 types of values that are relevant for this behavior. And there are 2 types of values that focus more on these outcomes for the self. And they are hedonic and egoistic values. And if people have strong hedonic values, they care about pleasure, comfort, having fun in life. That's very important. If people have strong egoistic values, you're focused on money, power, authority. And on the other hand, we have these 2 values that are focused more on the outcomes for the collective. So altruistic and biospheric values. And people with strong altruistic values, they care about the well-being of others, they care about social justice. And if you have strong biospheric values, you care about nature and the environment. And it's not the case that you can put people in one of these boxes, because we all endorse these 4 different values to a certain extent. Right? You may find hedonic values important, but also egoistic values and biospheric values, but you differ in the hierarchy. So which one is most important for you may differ. And as you can imagine, strong biospheric values are most strongly and consistently related to sustainable behavior. And what's interesting is that it has also been argued, or people have been saying, well, that's interesting, these biospheric values, but people only care about these values once their basic needs are met, right? So first you have the hedonic and egoistic values, maybe you need a certain amount of comfort or money, and only then we can start thinking about the environment. However, research on values has been conducted all over the world, and all these studies showed that actually all over the world, these 4 types of values are endorsed, and people also care about biospheric values. So also, for example, in a poor, there was a study conducted in Mexico, in a richer and in a poor area of the country. And in both areas, people also distinguish between all these 4 values and also care about biospheric values. Also in Asia and Africa and countries all over the world. So this seems to be a general pattern that people also care about biospheric values. And then what most people think, or what many people think, is that, well, I may care about biospheric values, I may care about nature and the environment, but most people probably won't really care about the environment. Well, there was a study conducted, the European Social Science Survey. It's a little bit small, but you see a long list of all different European countries, and then you see the strength of their values. So the more to the right the values are, the stronger they endorse them. And what you see in most of these countries is that actually these green, squares, are endorsed more. So the biospheric values are endorsed more strongly than hedonic values, and particularly than egoistic values. So this representative study suggests that actually most people do really care about the environment. So that is positive news, we could say. But if you then look at sustainable behavior, sustainable waste behavior, for example, it's often a conflict between our values. So for example, recycling your waste, that's in line with your biospheric values because it's good for the environment. But it's also maybe a bit of a hassle. You need to separate everything, have different bins in your kitchen. So it's not really in line with your hedonic or egoistic values. Or buying a very sustainable or product with a very sustainable package that's in line with your biospheric values, but it may be more expensive. So it may not be in line with your egoistic values. And luckily, this is not always the case. There's not always a conflict between, for example, your egoistic values and your biospheric values when it concerns sustainable waste behavior. So for example, reversed collection, that's a collection system that some Dutch municipalities have, where the recycled materials are collected from your doorstep, but the residual waste you have to bring to the container yourself. So you have to put in more effort to bring that away, while if you recycle, that is picked up. So in that way, they try to make their sustainable behavior more in line with your hedonic behavior. Also, if you have a pay-as-you-throw system, so where you pay for the amount of waste that you produce, then also producing less waste will save you money. So their egoistic and biospheric values are in line. There's not this conflict. And also this focus on the finances is something you see a lot in interventions. Policymakers try to focus on this, and several studies have been conducted to test if this indeed is an effective strategy. So this was, for example, an energy saving program in the United States, where they tried to promote that people would save energy. And they wanted to know what is more effective. If one, we tell people you can save money by saving energy, so save energy, or two, you can save the environment by saving energy, or three, you can save money and the environment, so therefore save energy. So I would like to do a small poll. I'm curious what you think. Do you think that saving money is most effective in promoting energy saving, that message, or the second message, save the environment, or if you focus on both? I see a lot of votes coming in, and I think there's quite a strong agreement. Not sure if you can already see it or if I have to click send first, but I think now most people have voted. Well, clearly, most of you think that if you focus on saving the money and saving the environment, that is most effective to promote energy saving behavior. Martje, if you can go back to the slides. So that would make sense, right? If you would focus on both messages, you have two advantages, so you would think that that is most effective. However, that is not what this study showed. It actually showed that the second message, save energy because then you save the environment, was most effective in promoting energy saving. And this has also been found for other behaviors. And why is that the case? Well, if you think about it, saving money by saving energy, you may not save a lot of money if you save energy, right? If you would lower the heater a little bit or switch off the lights if you leave a room, it's not going to save you a lot of money. So if you then really focus on this financial message, people may realize, well, this is actually not worth the effort, while doing something good for the environment is worth the effort, even if it's just a small effect. And actually this focus on money may also reduce people's intrinsic motivation they already have. So therefore it may be less effective. So this focus on egoistic values or the financial benefits may not always be most effective. Also for hedonic values, you could try to reduce this conflict between hedonic values and biospheric values by making the behavior more pleasurable. I already mentioned the reverse collection system, where you make it easier for people to recycle and more difficult if they produce a lot of waste. But I would also like to show a short video, which is a nice example of how you can try to make it more fun to do the sustainable behavior. All right, could I have the presentation back up? Yes, thank you. Oh, yeah, here we were. All right, so that's a nice example of trying to make the sustainable behavior that's in line with your biospheric values also in line with hedonic values. But also it's very important to note that, sorry.
Just reminding you, you have 2-3 minutes, Ellen. We'll skip a few questions in the end because you have a very interesting story to tell, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll be quick, thanks.
All
yes. Right. So hedonic values are important, but well-being is not only about hedonism, but it's also about well-being. So if people feel good, and although sustainable behavior is often not fun to do, it can make people feel good. So it can give a good feeling. And this is especially the case when people engage in a behavior autonomously, so when they freely choose to do so, when they have stronger biospheric values, and when it's clear that there are environmental benefits. So in that case, if you do something good for the environment, such as recycling or buying more sustainable packaging, it can signal to yourself that you're a good person, and it can give you a warm feeling, and it may also encourage other sustainable behavior. So this was a study that Danny Taufik conducted, a really interesting study where he tried to test this warm glow, which is more a psychological effect, if people are then also actually feeling warmer. So what he did is he gave half of the people, he asked them to fill out a carbon footprint calculator, and then he gave half of the people the feedback that they are relatively environmentally friendly, and the other half the feedback that they are relatively environmentally unfriendly. And they were in a room where the temperature was kept constant at 19 or 20 degrees. And then he asked people, how warm do you think this room is? And he found that if people thought they were relatively environmentally friendly, they perceived the room to be warmer than when they thought they were relatively environmentally unfriendly. So this warm glow, doing something good makes you feel good, apparently also works in real life, that you feel a bit warmer. All right, so then that's by focusing on the hedonic and egoistic values, but you can also focus on these biospheric values to promote sustainable behavior. And biospheric values influence behavior indirectly via environmental self-identity, which is the extent to which people see themselves as a pro-environmental person. And values are relatively stable, but identity can be changed by our past behavior. So if you remind people that they are very environmentally friendly, for example, that they switch off their lights if they leave a room, if they recycle sometimes, then they realize I'm a sustainable person. And then they also are motivated to engage in more other sustainable behaviors. But it also works the other way around. If you remind people that they do not always engage in sustainable behavior, they realize they are not a very environmental person, so their identity is weaker and they are less likely to engage in pro-environmental behavior. So this suggests that campaigns should not focus people on what they're not doing well, that they're not recycling, or that they should reduce their energy use, but you should emphasize what people already do. Now, finally, last few slides, the contextual factors. So the context can have a direct effect on our behavior. For example, you may live somewhere where there are no infrastructure to recycle or to buy sustainable packaging, but the context can also interact with personal factors. And this was a study where the context was the design of the packaging. So you see on the left-hand side, you see the design of a packaging that tried to make people focus more on their biospheric values. So the design was more green, using the the tree bark as a picture. It also had the text, "I'm green, how about you?" And the design on the right hand was more neutral. It was actually in a building where a lot of mathematicians worked, so it had some mathematical formulas on there. And Josefine Geiger, a former PhD student from our group, she wanted to test if people are more likely to recycle the sustainable packaging than the unsustainable packaging, because she argued that the sustainable packaging makes people aware of their biospheric values, and therefore they're more likely to recycle it. So people came to the study, and then she said, well, you have to wait a little bit, we're not ready, but to compensate for it, you get a beverage in either this cup or this cup. So they had to wait, and then afterwards the experimenter came to them and said, well, we're ready for you now, but you're not allowed to take the drink into the room, so you can throw it away and then come to the room. And people could either throw the cup in here in the residual waste bin, which was just around the corner, or walk a bit further to the recycling bin. And then she simply checked whether people recycled it or not. And the study showed that actually the original design was recycled 25% of the time, and the more sustainable design was recycled in 50% of the time. And interestingly, the effect was especially there, so people were especially more likely to recycle the sustainable cup when they had moderate biospheric values. So if people have very strong biospheric values, they'll recycle anyway, but if they don't have very strong biospheric values, this packaging design has an impact on them. So to sum up, knowledge is important, but don't expect it to be sufficient to change behavior. Try to make sustainable waste behavior in line with hedonic and egoistic values. Make it fun, make it the more attractive option. But a more sustainable long-term route is often to strengthen the influence of biospheric values, which, for example, could be done by reminding people of past pro-environmental behavior or via contextual factors such as design. So on behalf of the whole environmental psychology group, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for being a bit late.
No worries, it just means we have a little bit less time for questions now, but we might move some things to the panel discussion. And one of the questions from Arnold about the price willingness for consumers to pay for sustainable solutions, we will tackle that later on anyway, so we can move that one to a later stage. But Joska has a quick question about the long-term effects of the bottle bank arcade, the glasbak gokkast.
Yeah.
Does that have a lasting effect, or is the fun factor at some point wearing off?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point indeed, and that is a disadvantage of these type of strategies. Indeed, at first it's probably fun to go to the bottle bank arcade and indeed with your friends make a game out of it or something. But after a while, you have seen it, and indeed, you need to come up with something new to make it fun again. So therefore, these type of strategies can be effective, but it's difficult to make them effective in the long run. And therefore, also focusing or strategies that focus on these biospheric values may be more effective in the long run.
Yeah, very interesting to see these solutions. I myself, as a packaging nerd, was wondering, would people also throw in plastic bottles just to get the noises and the fun?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question.
So that was very, very interesting, Ellen. So thank you so much. We'll be talking to you in the panel a bit later on. So I would then ask our next speaker to join, would be Julia Granato, who is a researcher at the Wageningen University, although at this moment not in Wageningen, but in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. Right, Julia?
Yeah, in Zurich, yeah.
So I will leave the introduction of who you are and what you do, and of course the MyPack research you've been doing to you, and I will switch off my microphone now. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks Marcel for the invitation. So indeed, Ellen presented to you like more an overview of on how we can indeed promote sustainable behavior. And I will actually zoom into one way how we can increase sustainable responses, specifically from packaging. The research that I will present to you today is entitled A Meaningful Reminder on Sustainability when Explicit and Implicit Packaging Cues Meet. And these are 5 studies that we have conducted recently and are under review in the Journal of Environmental Psychology. I'm just actually working on the replies to the reviewers' comments just right now. Yeah, so briefly, indeed, I'm a PhD researcher in the group of market and consumer behavior in Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and this is my team made of Professor Hans van Trijp and Arnoud Fischer. Yeah, okay, just to introduce the topic briefly, as you may know, packaging is everywhere. Every goods produced on a mass scale has a packaging that is actually quickly throw away after you open the packaging and you consume the product. And this creates a huge environmental problem. And to limit this huge environmental problem, a lot of companies are actually engaging in the eco-packaging design. So they want to develop new form of sustainable packaging. You may have seen maybe in the supermarket more recycled materials, packaging that are biodegradable and compostable, food that are actually packed with less material, etc. So this is becoming a ever expanding trend. But on the other end, we have a communication problem. It is actually stated in literature, and we actually see every day, both in the moment of purchase and also in the moment of disposal. So many times it's difficult to understand and to recognize that this packaging is actually sustainable, is actually different from the conventional plastic version. So it's sustainable and has to be recognized in the moment of purchase, but also in the moment of disposal, because we have to know where to dispose it. So sustainable packaging is one of the type of innovation that we call disruptive types of innovation. So require a lot of technological investment, but actually there is a poor society recognition. So one question that we actually investigate in this research is to how we can improve the sustainability communication of eco-packaging innovations. And we do that, we use a theoretical background framework that we call the meaningful reminder. And we actually test implicit and explicit packaging cues on a range of sustainable consumer responses. So we see, later I will tell you more what I mean with implicit and explicit packaging cues, but what we want to measure is if we can increase sustainability salience, so the activation of the sustainability construct in consumer mind, sustainability perception of the packaging, and even consumer sustainable disposal behavior. So indeed, how we want to do that is to test implicit packaging cues, and with implicit we mean those cues that are processed through an inferential belief formation route. So, for example, imagine a non-uniform look of a recycled material, an opaque film of typical, for example, of biodegradable and compostable, or a different touch feeling, or a different graphic, or a different color, or a particular sound. And for example, some bio-based materials have a loud sound, really like a sort of, makes like a sort of crack sound that is really particular and really different from the normal sound instead of plastic. So with implicit, we mean these non-verbal cues that can actually lead to different inferences, such as indeed a visual element like opacity, color, graphic, or touch feeling, or sound, auditory aspects of the packaging. And instead, with explicit cues, we refer to information that are explicitly provided by the company, by the developer, and are processed for an informational belief formation route. So, for example, imagine a logo with an explanation of this packaging. So you have the biodegradable and compostable logo, and then underneath, the company explains you what actually this material is. For example, is material based on starch, is processed in this way, etc. Or a recycled material, and with the definition of what it is a recycled material and how it can be disposed. Or, for example, new technologies that are able to extend the food shelf life, so they also have a logo, and also they explain what this technology actually means and implies. So what we did indeed is we tested this combination of elements in a data collection with Dutch consumers in October and February of this year. And the first, and this actually indeed the KIDV Institute they developed many samples for this research to make this packaging as realistic as possible. So also with imagine a real brand called Granny, the graphics, the salad or the baby food or the biscuits included. So the real packaging that will look really realistic as you can see it in the supermarket. So in the first study, that is actually 2 by 2 between subject design, what we do is we divide consumers in 4 groups, and one group actually evaluate a packaging that is the control, in the sense that looks like a conventional plastic packaging. There are no cues that signal to you the sustainability aspect. Then we have another packaging where actually we want to manipulate these implicit cues. So in this case, we have a particular touch feeling, typical of some sustainable materials. Another one, instead, we give a packaging that looks like the control, but actually has a logo and the explanation of the biodegradable and compostable material. So explicit, you communicate sustainability explicitly with this information. And then we have another group of consumers that actually evaluate this packaging with implicit and explicit cues combined. So we want to see if actually this combination of explicit and implicit cues works better to communicate sustainability, or if it's actually better to have them in isolation. And actually how we measure, so what we measure is indeed salience of sustainability, that is the activation of the conscious consumer mind, and usually this is typically done for a lexical decision task. So basically consumer had to respond to some words appearing on the screen, and the idea is that if the package that they evaluated raise sustainability constant in their mind, they should reply faster to sustainability words than to normal words. So you measure reaction time. And then another task that is called the thoughts listing task, where actually consumer had to write all the thoughts and feelings came to their mind while they were experiencing this packaging. And then you have also a perception of sustainability, so to what extent this package is sustainable to you. And basically, in the first study, we see that actually the combination of explicit and implicit cues does not increase sustainability salience and perception. So that actually more is not more. So providing more cues, combining implicit and explicit, in this case does not have a positive effect. So does not have an increment in the sustainability salient and neither in perception. And actually, we have to be careful, because in some cases can actually decrease this effect, as you see in the first image. If you look at the black line is going down, and then in that case, the combination of these cues significantly decreased the salience of sustainability. Okay, then we did also replication with other packaging technologies and other salad, and and other products, and actually we obtained the same results. So again, you have to be careful, because apparently it looks like this combination. So if you provide more, it doesn't mean that you actually persuade me. It doesn't mean that you actually deliver the sustainability message more strongly. Okay, then in the study 2, we actually thought that we had to study some condition. So what if this effect depends on the implicit cues? Because some of these implicit cues, for example, if you think about a green color, can already signal sustainability by itself, because green and then rises in association with nature, with the environment. So maybe can also work by itself. Or for example, a graphic that has a natural looking. But instead, if I show you, for example, a packaging with this loud sound typical of PLA or bio-based material, maybe that is just a sound for you and does not actually convey you any sustainability association yet in your mind. So maybe some cues are meaningless by themselves in signaling sustainability, and some others are instead more meaningful in signaling sustainability by themselves. So we want to indeed investigate if this is the case. So we made another study where we change these implicit cues. So we have like the sound, indeed, the tactile property, the opacity level, the graphic, and the explicit, and the color, and then we are still the explicit elements. So they are absent or present. So logo with the explanation or not. And we measure again salience and perception of sustainability. And here you can see that indeed some implicit cues already have a meaning in signaling sustainability. And you can see from these measures of the salience of sustainability. And if you also look at the perception of sustainability, you see that when you combine an explicit cues with an implicit cues that actually is meaningless by themselves, like the sound and the touch, you have a higher increment in sustainability, salience, and perception than when you actually combine it with an implicit cue that is already meaningful. So, for example, the look and the color. And this is also already a condition 1 for this effect. So the conclusion could be that it's better to combine these explicit cues with meaningless implicit cues. But then to go further, we want to see if actually this effect can also depend on the explicit cue. So we built on previous studies, and now we change another condition, so the explicit part. And in this case, we actually create videos. So there is imagine that consumer had to listen to this packaging expert, is a material engineer, and this packaging expert explained the recyclability of recycled material, so this technology of a new packaging, in different ways. So in one way, it did not provide any information on the sustainability aspect. In another condition, instead, it provides generic information in the sense that it explains what it means, recycled material, and the fact that it can be reused in a new packaging if it is disposed correctly in the plastic bin, and what actually it means recycled, so as a new life. And in another condition, instead, these explicit cues had to sort of create a link between the higher sustainability of the packaging and different sensory properties of the packaging. So, for example, we say this is a recycled material, and because it's processed in this way, it can also have different sensory properties, such as different touch feeling, different auditory elements, different visual aspects. So, try to make a connection, to already make an association between the sustainability and the different sensory properties, so this missing link. And we call it as a specific type of information. And then we measure the same as before, so salience and perception of sustainability, but also actual disposal behavior of the packaging. So consumers, they were unaware that we were actually measuring how they dispose the packaging and the product. So there were different bins, so plastic, organic, the generic, and the paper. And then we want to check if, based on these different conditions, actually consumer dispose the packaging and the product more or less sustainably. And so we did another data collection in February, and indeed, first of all, you can see that if we check the results for sustainability perception, consumers perceive the package as more sustainable when specific explicit information are provided. So when indeed this information, this text on the packaging, in the video, actually communicate this link, this missing link between higher sustainability and different sensory properties. So and also that specific explicit information best serve meaningless implicit cues. So when these cues are indeed meaningless by themselves, they don't signal any sustainability message by themselves. And if you look actually at the results of the behavior, we see that there are also significant differences, in the sense that consumers dispose the packaging more sustainably when specific information were provided rather than generic or none. And instead, we did not find any significant results for how they dispose the product, so the food waste behavior. And here again is just a backup of this result to see indeed that the only condition where we have significant results is also in the specific condition. So it means that indeed manipulating these elements, specific and implicit packaging, you can actually improve the sustainability communication by indeed increasing sustainability salience, perception, and even the disposal behavior of the packaging. Of course, this has to be done in a careful way and in a scientific based way, because indeed is not in all conditions more is more. In some conditions, more is less. So providing more cues can actually be harmful for the sustainability communication or leave it unaffected. So you have to see if these implicit cues are inherently meaningless or meaningful in signaling sustainability by themselves, and use the explicit information in a good way. So creating a missing link, a reason to believe. And this can increase not only the sustainability perception of the packaging, but the actual sustainable behavior. And another finding was also related with skepticism, so that is actually this information reduce even feeling of skepticism towards the packaging, especially when you have a new technology that you are not familiar with. Yeah, and that was just to give a brief overview of this study that indeed, as I said, is under review at the Journal of Environmental Psychology, and was also presented at the Pangborn conference of this year. Thanks a lot also from my team. Marcel, I don't hear you. I think you have your microphone off.
It sometimes has a lag.
Yeah, now it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say thank you so much for displaying this wealth of information in these 3 studies that you did, and I would certainly invite those that very much work on how can we impact perception of sustainability of consumers, and what can we do on the packaging to look into those researches and the data in detail. And in fact, it was we are a tiny little bit behind, but I'll sneak some minutes out of the panel discussion. So if there is a question in the audience, I'll take one, and otherwise we'll see you again in the panel discussion. I, at least for myself, wrote a number of things down that I need to think about a little bit more to see what that actually means and how we can, as packaging designers, take that into consideration. I think also the next presentation would dive into specifically items like perception of sustainability, which I find as a packaging technologist an interesting one. It's, what we feel as experts, what is more sustainable, is certainly not always the same what consumers think. And I think also some of these elements came in your research, right? So I do not see questions for now in the chat, Julia, so I will thank you for this moment, and I will see you again in roughly 20 minutes in the panel discussion, yes?
Yeah, okay, bye-bye.
Marcel, there are actually questions in the chat.
Oh, now I see one coming. Oh, you're totally right. I have to scroll down. Haha. So Julia, bear with me for a second here.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I also see two questions from Arnold and Luis.
You can pick up those 2 questions if we take a minute to do that.
Yeah, so for example, Luis asked if it's also the type of product, an extra variable that could dictate how the combination of implicit and explicit cue should be used the best to convey the right sustainable message. Yeah, of course, it can be. We also tested with different products, as I said, indeed. So we also made some replications. So the first study was indeed with biscuits. It is indeed quite a generic product, plain biscuit. And we replicate the same study with fresh salad and baby food. It is also, there are really different products from each other, and again also changing, manipulating implicit and explicit cues, and we actually found consistent results that reflect the same trend of study 1A, for example. And we also indeed choose quite extreme products between each other. So baby food really for a sensitive category, fresh salad really convenient, and more hedonic plain biscuits. Yeah, so we have some evidence for that. And then there is another question, but I don't know if I have time. So from Arnold, or I can continue later. I don't know.
If you manage to do it in 1 minute, it makes more sense to do it now.
Okay, so is
like,
there any influence of the implicit cues on the perceived quality of the product? Is some material lower quality than the new material? So because we also have results on the indeed which inference consumer made, because we measure this inference quite spontaneously, because indeed they had to write down all the thoughts and feelings they had while they were experiencing the packaging. So we also code them in terms of quality, convenience, skepticism, and many more. And actually, yeah, in terms of this like more exploratory, qualitative part, the quality was not really so these different materials did not really affect the quality of the product, but for example, sometimes affect the convenience instead, or like, for example, the loud sound of the packaging was considered as more disturbing or less convenient if you are like on the train, because it makes really a lot of sound. So we have also all of these results as well. But if they publish the paper, I will share it with you all.
Exactly. So hoping and assuming that your answers have brought some light to the questions that we have here, I would like to move on to our next speaker. So thank you, Julia, once again, and we'll see you in about 20 minutes. And the next presentation is already on the screen, which makes me to introduce Christel de Bruin. If you could switch on your camera and microphone, please, Christel. I will just already explain you as a qualitative research executive, if I say it correctly, at Ipsos, one of Europe's largest market research firms. Yes? Again, hoping I did not make a mistake there. I will leave the floor to you, and you will have also 15-ish minutes, and we'll talk to you after that.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcel. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christel de Bruin, and I am a qualitative researcher at Ipsos, the Netherlands. And today I will talk about what we experience as market researchers concerning sustainability, and then both from the client side and the consumer story. First of all, Ipsos is a global market research company, and we're present in 90 markets, offering more than 75 research solutions to help businesses and organizations answer their business questions. And during this presentation, I will also mostly use global data from our Ipsos trend research. Today, I'll be talking about two different perspectives. So on the one hand, the questions that our clients come to us with. What are they concerned about, and what do they need advice on, and the input from consumers. And then on the other hand, the consumers' view on sustainability, their needs, and specifically packaging. Well, our clients are very versatile. So from businesses to NGOs, from the financial sector to FMCG to health, and they come to us with their business questions, which we turn into research questions and diving into the consumers' motivations, attitudes, behavior, perception, triggers and barriers, and we answer those questions. But what about sustainability? Well, our clients, they know that sustainability is an important topic and that it has been increasing more and more. They're aware that this is something to take into account. We see that nowadays many companies actually hire an actual sustainability officer to help them develop a sustainability strategy. All companies acknowledge that sustainability should be part of their future business model. But it has not always been that way, because in the past years, I think we would receive business questions and they would ask us, oh, could you maybe add a little extra question on sustainability as a last question in the survey? Or just in your interview guide, maybe quickly check something about sustainability. But that definitely changed, because mainly in the last year, we've seen clients coming in with sustainability as their question. They're not sure what they're looking for exactly, but are aware that it's time to take it serious now. And clients are aware that this is not only to make sure that customers keep buying their products, but as a company, you also attract employees and they will feel proud working for a company that takes this into account. Think about the way you are perceived in the media or about your investors. All in all, building a sustainable and responsible business is key for success. But there are so many aspects that you could focus on. Clients want to prioritize their efforts by understanding, well, where to play, what to focus on. Do we need to focus on sustainable sourcing, sustainable packaging, zero waste, invest in projects in developing countries? Is it about our ingredients? Is it about transparency? Where to start? Where do we begin? Or in other words, as we say it, where do we play? And that's why they come to us and why they need the input from consumers. The key question is often, how do we translate sustainability into our products and into our brands in a credible way? And then the second important question is how to play. Because once you've determined where to play, companies want to understand how. So, for example, assume for a certain product, it is the pack design that is where they should play, so where to begin. Well, next, you need to understand the consumer. Because what is it that they specifically want concerning pack? What are the key elements that they find important, that trigger them? How do they talk about this? What is it they do not know yet, what they want to learn, what they need to take action? And that's different for every brand, for every category. It's very much about your own brand assets. It's about which elements of your brand can you use, which should you maybe change a bit, and what do consumers allow you as a brand to communicate? What is believable? We do have to understand that these consumer needs are not always as clearly defined as we would like them to be, because consumers are not always aware. They do not really know themselves. It's difficult to articulate for them. Also for them, this is still quite an abstract subject. So consumers need you as a company, as a brand, to guide them and to educate them. Because in the end, consumers follow companies. We see that only 13% of consumers view themselves as responsible for products which are environmentally and socially responsible, while 39% view companies as the responsible ones. And they also need brands or companies to help them, because often sustainability is not the main driver to purchase a product or a service. Consumers want to choose more sustainable products, but for example, 49% still do not find most sustainable products really practical. And last, consumers do not want to compromise. So increasing market share via sustainability will only happen if there's no compromise needed on the core category drivers. So for example, think about food. With food products, this is often taste. So consumers are not willing to compromise on taste in order to purchase a more sustainable product. So let's dive into that consumer perspective a bit more. Let's start with packaging. So what is the importance of packaging within this whole sustainability question for consumers? Well, when we think again of the question, so where to play, we see that avoid lots of packaging is the #1 action that people are likely to take to save the environment. And second, it's about buying less new products. And then it's about recycled materials. So we see that in the minds of people, it's more about the amount of packaging. And when we look at what they think that what could actually impact the environment, we see that food waste is #1. It's waste, it's single-use plastic, and dealing with packaging waste. And this feeling of being more in control or having more impact when it comes to food waste is linked to feelings of guilt. I think this is something that many in the Netherlands probably know, restjesdag, the day you eat everything you still have left in the fridge, or finishing your whole plate, even though you really cannot eat anymore. feeling guilty because of food waste is something that has been there for decades, for generations. And it's something we feel like we can have a personal impact on because we know how to. And of course, throwing away food still happens, which leads to these guilty feelings. And we see that people actually feel more guilty about wasting food than using disposable cups or disposable plates. One thing here, though, is that we also know that food waste is on top because of the financial aspect of it. So if there's a financial incentive, the likeliness that people are willing to act is often higher. But coming back to those actions that people are likely to take to save the environment, that was about avoiding lots of packaging. So we know that single-use plastic has exploded as a key consumer issue. So many are very interested in reducing how much plastic they use daily, and they're starting to question the way there's convenience on the one hand, and then this culture that has been created in which we just use and use and use disposable products, and how these two can still coexist. This all shows that, yes, consumers are aware, are willing to take action, but there are two main issues. And the first one is, as we call it, the say-do gap. So saying one thing, but your behavior shows something else. So people often respond that they're willing to change behavior, but in reality, in their actual behavior, we see something different. And that links back to consumers not always willing to make compromises, because there's convenience, there's price, there's habits, there's so many things, so many factors. And then there's sustainability. Where does that come in? Next to the say-do gap, we see that knowledge on sustainability is still rather low. Because what is sustainable packaging actually? How do consumers define it? We know that recyclability, for example, is only one aspect of the product life cycle. But for consumers, this is the number one thing they think about. It is the perceived environmental responsibility that provides comfort for consumers, that they're doing the right thing. We feel very good about recycling. And the large majority also believe that it makes a positive difference without actually knowing how. But it's something that we can control, that we can actually do. And it's so rather easy. It's doable. Even though we know that significant behavior change cannot be reached through package design alone, there are some examples here that do have the potential to stand out on shelf, to ultimately drive change. They are new, it's clear, understandable for consumers, because we've seen from research in supermarkets that if you do not tell on your pack very explicitly that your pack is sustainable and how exactly, consumers do not realize. Logos are overlooked, and consumers still have their own perceptions of what is bad and what is good when it comes to packaging. In consumers' minds, plastic is automatically bad. And when they think about, okay, what is sustainable packaging, people will still come up with a brownish-looking paper bag. That's how it often still works in the minds of consumers. Key is, consumers do not know exactly what is sustainable, and they want to learn from brands. And brands and companies should educate them, tell them what you're doing, how you're doing that, and what you hope to achieve in the future. So, in a nutshell, from a business perspective, companies should discover a path that makes sense for their own current business and industry, as well meets the needs of their consumers. But sustainability is a really complex topic, and one that is equally challenging for consumers to navigate through. We've seen that waste is among the top global environmental concerns, and it's therefore a common entry point for consumer packaged goods businesses is recycling and packaging. However, we also see that this is becoming more of a fundamental expectation from consumers. So from a nice to have, it's kind of turning into a hygiene factor. So it's difficult to really differentiate for businesses. We also see that next to pack, other elements are, of course, really important to meet the needs of your consumers when it comes to sustainability. And one is definitely transparency. People expect some sort of level of transparency. They want to know where their products come from, how they're made. And we've seen that they respond best to a specific set of goals in which, as a company, you can show exactly where you are, how you're making progress. Important to, of course, show evidence on the claims that you're making. And in the context of environmental concerns around, for example, food, consumers are also looking for transparency as a way of reassurance. Many really care about how their food and beverages are produced, and they want to know everything they can about the process. Next to transparency, we also see that local sourcing is becoming more important in many countries. So it says that 66% of global consumers state that they're willing to pay a premium for local produced food items, if that would have an influence on climate change. But again, keep in mind the say-do gap. This is what people say they're willing to do. And then a last note, when implementing some sort of sustainability into a brand or a company, do not forget about the different target groups, of course. When looking at buying behavior and willingness to pay for sustainable products, the younger generations do seem to be more considerate, especially Gen Z, millennials. They prefer to buy from sustainable brands and are willing to pay more compared to the older generations. For companies, it's therefore really important to create the image of a sustainable brand also for the younger generation in order to appeal to this group, to hopefully attach them to your brand for the long run. This said, again, the say-do gap. We just finished a research actually last week in the UK among teenagers, and we were, to be honest, a bit shocked about how little they do. So there is a lot of conversation. They talk a lot. There's a lot of willingness about purchasing sustainable products and the way they think about it, but the actual behavior doesn't really show that. So a lot of say and not that much do. Here again, we see the important role for companies to take the lead on this. We see that sustainability is a topic that's discussed by many. It's discussed a lot. But now it's time to start changing behavior. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Crystal. Very, very interesting again. I would have many questions myself and want to hear a lot about these interesting researches you guys are doing, learning again new terms like the say-do gap, which you kind of realize it's there, but there are apparently official terms for these things. I would say in this case I would allow 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we move to the panel, because then we might lose the opportunity to see if there's any specific questions. I know I would have some. I learned quite a few interesting figures also from the researches that you guys are doing. For now, I'll scroll down again just before missing anything again. But it seems to be very clear what you've been telling, which is good news. I will dwell upon a couple of those things that you said in the panel discussion. And before we head off into that, I would like to introduce into the screen my colleague and our intern Tao. Tao Hessenfeld is a student at the Twente University, Industrial Design, but I'll leave you to introduce yourself a tiny bit and the research and the work that you're doing here at KIDV and the link to our topic of today.
Yes, thank you, Marcel. Well, first of all, that I would like to say thanks for the 3 speakers for the really interesting presentations. And yeah, I'm Taal Hessenveld. I'm a graduate intern at the KIDV. And I'm from the University of Twente. And at the moment, I'm doing a master thesis about the relationship between consumer behavior and packaging design. And I'm going to design a tool which should help companies to incorporate consumer behavior. So the aim is to help companies to stimulate sustainable consumer behavior through the packaging design. And we prepared some discussion points for this afternoon. So shall we start with the first?
Exactly. In the many questions and discussions you had with companies and consumers, quite a few questions came up, and you have a few questions that we would like to have the audience participate in. So if everybody could grab their mouses or touchpads, and if Marge, you could put the first question on the screen. Let's see how you feel about this here.
So the first question, commitment to sustainability goals and translating them into our packaged products make us stand out from our competitors. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, 60 plus people have responded so far. We'll wait.
Okay, I think it's really interesting that some people disagree. Well, from literature, we know that there's a positive relationship between environmental performance and financial performance. And also in the talk we just saw from Ipsos, we also saw some interesting facts that it is good for the company itself and also for the image you create as a company.
Yeah, I guess it depends a tiny bit on what you mean as survive as a company, because there's many products that people do not really think about in terms of sustainability and still buy it. But I would continue this discussion and take this as a starting point for the panel discussion and ask Ellen, Crystal, and Julia to join us as well. Because I would imagine you guys have some thoughts about these results here, whether you think it's a logical way people answer here. And we do realize, of course, that the audience we have here is not your average audience, so that's perhaps not entirely fair. Nonetheless, I might imagine you have some thoughts when reading and seeing this. Who wants to kick off?
Yeah, I could. So
Yes, Ellen.
what it aligns a little bit with what Crystal was also saying, that studies also show that if companies are sustainable, so for example, if they endorse corporate environmental responsibility, and if they really show this, that the employees working at the company, but also actually the customers of the company, are also more likely to see themselves as environmental because they are part of the company or belong to the, or yeah, feel connected to the company. So it may actually also promote sustainable behavior among employees and customers. But it is, of course, important that the organization is then truly sustainable or pro-environmental and also shows this.
Yeah, and not a type of green fronting, let's say, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what I find interesting actually in this is something that I experienced firsthand is, yes, survive as a company, you need, of course, for people to buy your product, so your image needs to be right, but survival would also mean maintaining talent. And not that I particularly want to point to myself as a talent, but I have had the situation in the past where I basically left the company because I felt they were not doing anything on this front, and I moved to another place. So, and this type of effects you do see happening. There are companies, if you look at where do people want to work when they graduate, 10 years ago versus now, massive difference where people feel to work. So that's in terms of survival of your company. It's actually a very interesting dimension.
And I would also like to add that in terms of survival, it also depends on the kind of product you are creating as a company. Because, for example, if you create a soda product, it's really different than a salad. So, and you are also attracting different consumers. As Ellen also said, it has also to do with the brand identity, because brand identity contains self-expressive benefits. So indeed, as a consumer, you can express yourself through the products you are buying.
What do you think about this, Julia, over there?
Yeah, I'm always thinking also about indeed that, yeah, it's important, but it's also important to keep in mind indeed not to do greenwashing, because it's also a phenomenon that is quite spread. So when companies say that a product is sustainable, but in reality is not, or is just partially or really limited, and that's also has a huge impact on how then consumers see all the other sustainable products, because then there is the risk that they don't believe it anymore. So
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. I think you have to be very aware of the category you're in, the product you're selling, your brand image, the way people perceive you as a brand. But like we said before, sustainability is such a broad concept. You do not have to do everything as a company, but you have to see which elements could fit your brand, the category you're in, and the product you're selling. And then if you pick well, then it will definitely help you survive with the company for sure.
Could not agree more. Yeah, it reminds me of one of the things you said earlier. I think it was you, Crystal, that mentioned perception of consumers. I had the example here. As long as it looks like brown carton, yes, ticket box, it's sustainable. And obviously, as a packaging technologist, and I would imagine quite a few in the audience have this experience as well. Replacing certain materials with a carton, something which then still features plastic and therefore not recyclable, will be incinerated, etc. I mean, I will not go on a rant here, but the gap between perception of consumers and actual sustainability is a tricky one. And by Monique, she has to go, I see, and Daniel as well. This was a quick bridge, not too subtle, I have to admit, to the second question we want to pull up on the screen. So if Maartje could help us here for a sec.
So the second question was also asked in the chat about the price. Are consumers willing to pay a higher price for packaging they consider to be environmental friendly?
Particularly added the element that they consider to be environmentally friendly. It would be also interesting to see to do the same test if they have a range of packages and the actual environmental impact. You know, and discuss how you measure it, but there is certainly a gap there. Again, we do see a bit of a trend in the questions, the answers coming in, I would say. Not everybody has made up their mind, but we do see a tendency that people would disagree with this statement, that people do not want to pay a higher price for packaging. And even, yeah, I think that would be roughly where we stand. So, interesting to see your take on this. You know, we don't know exactly, obviously, the background of all the people in the audience and those that have answered these questions, but I might imagine there is a little bit of a difference between your standard audience versus this one. At the same time, I don't know if you would feel, dear panel, would feel that this would be very different if we would just ask 100 people out on the street.
yeah, I think also depends what do you mean with higher prices, like how high, how much more, because like also in the survey that we have also done within MyPack with 5,035 consumers across 5 different countries, we also asked this question. Was like, one was indeed how much more they were willing to spend for example, biodegradable and compostable plastics. And before we asked sustainability perception, so we knew that they consider them as more sustainable. And then I think that the average was that they are willing to spend between 5 and 10% more on biodegradable and compostable materials, but that were also depending on different countries, because we had Netherlands, Germany, Greece, France, and Italy. And then when we did the market segmentation analysis, then there were like Italians and German consumer that were willing to spend a bit more, so around 10. And so I think it also depends on many factors, also country related, for example. But indeed, it was not so high, not so much more. It was between 5 and 10%, so it's quite low.
Yeah, and actually,
Yes.
this country effect, one of the slides that Crystal showed was also quite interesting, I thought, where consumers were asked which strategy you think has the most impact in terms of packaging impact. There, and then recycling was considered very high in France, for example, and reusability a lot lower, and Germany the other way around, which I found quite interesting. So for sure, there's a country difference there. And,
I would also say from literature, indeed, I found a paper which said it was 1 to 5% when you compare a conventional packaging to an environmental looking packaging. But in general, you could say that consumers are not willing to sacrifice for price and taste. So these two factors are really important for consumers.
Yeah, I think we see that as well. I think there is, of course, a group that is willing to pay more, but the majority of people are not. And we've done some recent research into this as well. And you see that people really want to show you that they are environmentally engaged, but they will start talking about, well, I'll just buy a bigger package, like a family pack, so I don't have to buy 3 times a smaller pack. I really want to invest, but price is really difficult. Also, many people just feel like this is the responsibility from the company, so they have to pay that extra amount. Why should I, as a consumer, have to pay extra? So, no, I'm afraid most people will disagree with this.
I think.
Ellen?
I think Aniek also sharply noted in the chat that there are some conflicting findings maybe between Crystal's talk and my talk, because indeed, I think research also shows that what you're also saying, that most people care about the environment, and also that most people are willing to incur some costs or effort in order to act pro-environmental. And I completely imagine that indeed the amount that they're willing to pay extra is not that high, but I would say it also may depend on the context. So, for example, if you're in a supermarket and the focus is all the time on the prices, on discounts, you also create a context where people are focused more on their egoistic values, for example, and much less on their biospheric values. So I think you should also not see this willingness to pay 1 or 5% more as a fixed number, but it also really depends on what you trigger, the kind of environment you create. So I would say that's maybe a bit more nuanced also.
Yeah, fair point. If you would order online, as I myself came across at some point, I don't know, it was peanuts in bulk, something like this, like a kilogram instead of just 150. There was an option, sustainable packaging. It was, I don't remember, I think it was 50 cents extra, which is quite a bit amount for packaging, but apparently people were willing to do that. And I just did it out of curiosity, and what I got, I would quite sharply disagree with their statement. It's more sustainable, but that's beside the point. So I fully agree that context does a lot. And the say-do gap certainly comes into play here, right? If you ask them, would you buy a more sustainable? Yeah, for sure. Do they actually more? A little bit of a different story. And we have one final question we would like to ask our audience to participate in and share their thoughts, just to see what you feel. This is about informing consumers through the packaging, the information we put on it. For example, what type of material it is, how you dispose of this packaging, the environmental impact of it. Is it recyclable? Yes, no. I don't think we need to wait too much longer to understand. This is a bit of an open door, I guess, on one hand. Yeah, so first thoughts, anyone, besides this being an obvious one, but it also leads to some questions then, how to do this.
I think it's also, right, this is always good to do, and especially if there are misperceptions, but also like to remind people that research shows that simply providing people with information is not likely to change behavior. So this is important, but don't expect any effects on behavior just from informing consumers.
Yeah.
And Ellen, do you think that informing about the environmental impact or the disposal behavior, which do you think has a bigger impact?
Do you mean or what exactly do you mean if you inform them about their own disposal behavior, or how to dispose?
How to dispose.
Yeah, so this how-to knowledge is generally not likely to really change behavior, but if you try to present it in a way that it also targets people's motivations more, so if you try to also emphasize people's biospheric values or remind them of their own past behavior, right? If you would put on a package like, oh, this is a very sustainable option, you made a sustainable choice or something like that, you could strengthen their environmental identity. So there could be ways in which you also try to include in the information more a focus on their motivations, and then it could be more impactful.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and I also agree with Ellen that I think scientifically based, then just better, because better does not mean anything, I think. So scientifically based, indeed. So, for example, like the study that we have conducted now, where we actually have this generic sort of information and more specific. So the one that they just describe what the recycled material means, what it is and how to dispose it, versus information that can actually create this missing link, so this missing association between the higher sustainability and different sensory properties. So like this PLA material, like also a lot of time you see it in the tomato, no, this sound, typical sound of PLA, no, but then you have to communicate this sustainable, not just through a logo or just basic information. This is based of PLA. Yeah, what it means. So this PLA, and because is processed in this and that way, create this certain noise, this certain sound different from what you're used to. So also making this missing link is also part of providing this particular information. And then we see that in the result that had a significant increase in how consumer perceive the sustainability of the package, while there were no significant increase on the generic information, for example, on the information that does not provide this missing link. And I also another thing maybe I also want to say, and also there is also research on green skepticism, green consumer confusion. It actually state that overloading consumer also with information can also actually have an opposite effect. So the green consumer confusion, one of these confusion is caused by overload of information, or like confusion and clarity, so when the information are unclear or the technology is too complex. So there are also studies that also indeed show that can also lead to green consumer confusion, in turn to negative attitudes toward the packaging and the product.
Yeah, very good point. I think also what Christine said in the chat, yes, we must inform, but each country has its own recycling rules and guidance. I would even add to that, looking at the Netherlands, that each municipality almost has different rules. It seems to be it's very scattered throughout the Netherlands, so that's not helping. So even if you would, as a brand owner, want to put the right logos and guidance on your packaging, if it goes to multiple countries, it's already very tricky. If you see how it works in the Netherlands already, then you can imagine it's not so easy. But there's certain very basic things we could start providing, perhaps. But that's perhaps a discussion for another day. And actually, something I wanted to link to a presentation we did recently, or a webinar on claims that you make on packaging, because it's very easy to say stuff on your packaging. Oh, the greenest ever, the lightest, the lowest impact, and so forth. There is also things that you cannot just say if you can't prove it. And if this is specifically, linking to this topic, I think Maartje might be able to share the link in the chat if you would like to understand more about the consequences, also legally, of what you write on your packaging in terms of environmental claims. please have a look at that. And with that, we are actually arriving at the last seconds almost of this webinar. I think Tao would like to have a final word, asking people for a bit of help in a research project that would help in turn us as KIDV and the companies that we are trying to help with these matters. So please, there's the link that we wanted to look at. And I would want to thank all the speakers present here and the audience, obviously, for your interaction. So thank you, Ellen, thank you, Julia, thank you, Crystal. I'm going to log up.
Marcel, can I say what? Can I say something?
Yes.
I was putting a link for Arnold for a question we had. So yeah, regarding my master thesis, I would like to conduct a user study where companies can test my tool, my designed tool. So when you are a company working on food packaging and you are willing to gain some insights and to help me with providing some feedback on the tool, that would be really helpful. And after this webinar, you get an email, and in the email you can state that you are willing to help or not. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And if you're willing to help, I will provide I will provide more information about the user test later on. So yeah, thanks in advance.
Right. So thank you everybody for joining. We're just scratching the surface of this hugely interesting topic. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, audience. And I wish everybody a nice day.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.